All right, well, I'm gonna try to do this with my phone instead of doing it with the GoPro, because that takes a long time to edit. It's really easy to do on the phone. So the old boat is out, and for those of you wondering, yes, it is a Mercury Marine block with the serial number and everything. So new one going in it is a 72 block with Scat H-beam rods and diamond 7.7 dished pistons, which are 2618 with kind of a stockish size wristband. But main reason for pulling this thing out was because my machine shop needed the flywheel and the balancer, and I was going to pull it out, or pull the transmission out and the balancer, and then give it to him, and then try to go run my 5. But this side is burning so much oil compared to this side that most of the plugs on that side would foul really quickly. And when you put a new set in, you would get all 8 cylinders, and when you didn't, it was basically on 6.5, 7, because even with the LS coil packs with that 40 to 50,000 volts per coil pack, it was still struggling real hard. Like yesterday, I went out, or the day before I tore it down, I went out and drove it, and on 2.5 pounds with fresh plugs in it and a crank trigger system that wasn't creating a ton of errors, man, she was spicy for what it was. So I'm pretty excited. The new engine should be around 10.5 to 1 compression ish. That all depends on how much we took off the block, how much piston to deck clearance that we have. I was told that 8 thousandths were taken off of it, and most early 351s are a .024 in the hole. So what does that give us? Like, I'm horrible at math, but like 16 thousandths in. So I have to basically assemble everything in order to see exactly where we're going to be for compression ratio, so I can order the correct MLS head gasket. We'll probably end up somewhere around a 60 thousandths MLS head gasket to get compression down. If it was zero decked, it would be really tough to get it under 11 to 1, even with a huge head gasket, which I don't want to do. I know that some people say quench matters, some people say it doesn't. It puts more stress into the deck surface when you have a greater surface area, more chance for blowing a head gasket. But let's old bullet a little bit more. So near the end of the season, not end of the season, actually beginning of this year, I put on a VR sensor compared to the Hall effect sensor, because I was burning through Hall effect sensors. And people ask me why that is, and I've never done that. And the only problem was here, which was literally, it was about 3 inches in front of the Hall effect sensor, if that. So it wasn't a problem of driving, it was when you stopped the car, it heat soaked the hell out of the sensor, and those things do not like anything over, about 250 degrees, and it was getting hotter than that, so it was killing the tiny little electronics inside of the sensor. And I also went from an MS3X that was a completely unknown ECU, I had a lot of issues with that, where there were boards that were not touching quite correct. I found some broken pins. I found variable resistors for the VR output input that were weird, and I really do think with the MS3 Pro Ultimate that it actually helped fix that problem, because I think there was a problem with the buffering or the filtering of just the natural input that was coming into it. So I'm hoping that fixes it permanently, because I drove it around and didn't have any problems at all, and before it would only present to the track. So we'll see if this works, but this thing's been working flawless. The only time that I actually get a sync error now is during startup, which is kind of normal because of the uneven galloping of not only a weird compressioned, worn out engine, but just cranking period. So I'm going to do a teardown on it. We'll pull some caps. We'll maybe pull a piston or two. I'm expecting maybe to find a piece of a skirt in there, because these cast pistons like to bust off skirts. And every oil change, there was kind of a little bit of metal in it. Nothing where it would have been like, oh no, the engine's grenading itself, but enough where something was rubbing something, just enough where some of the pieces were magnetic, some pieces weren't. You know, this engine doesn't have a ton of miles since I rebuilt it. Well, not rebuilt it, but since I had it apart and put it together. And then I'm going to make sure that I take a picture of the wheel lug still holding on one of the mains. Yeah, so it should be fun. I'll do a little video after I get this thing partially torn down, and we will see where we're at. Alrighty, short block is torn down. So I decided to, not that I already took it off, but I got a picture. This was the one holding one of the main studs on. This is a lug nut. You can see it's got some, you know, molly on it and stuff. The only thing I found that freaked me out was this. And I was like, oh my God, it's a rocker something, I don't know. But guess what? It's a vacuum cap. I don't know how the hell it got in there. Must have been when I had a valve cover off. Yeah, it's just rock hard from oil. But otherwise it's hollow. This is a vacuum cap, thank God. I was like, oh no, like a lifter's coming apart or something. So I got the pan off, and this is kind of the stuff that I was seeing. I don't know if you can see it, but there's like little bits, like right there, little bits of metal everywhere. And zip tie. So this thing was super dirty. It took me like 3 oil changes to make the oil not black. So it's a little shiny in some spots. There's little pieces of metal places. I don't know where it came from, but that's fine. The good thing is I pulled a rod cap off and then the main. So the rod cap, you can see in there, is decent. Those are factory bearings from 1978, and all the rods are straight. Everything's still torqued correctly. The crank was rusted when I got it, so you can see maybe there's a little bit. You can actually see the rust, and like over here. I took 400 grit and 1200 grit and just folded it over and just kind of the whole thing. And the bearings, the thrust was in spec. This is just kind of what they look like. There's a little bit of copper that it went through, just a tiny bit, but that means I got my converter spacing pretty good. Once again, it's factory bearings from Ford, factory everything, besides these main studs I had laying around that probably had 3 or 4 torque cycles on them. And then I ran out of one, that's why I used the lug nut. But yeah, everything's good. I don't see any cap fretting or anything. There's a little bit of copper on the edge, which I can't remember exactly what that means, but maybe the crank was flexing just a tiny bit. I'm not sure. But the rod cap is pretty good. You know, things had a little bit of junk in them, but nothing crazy. They are kind of loose, but I found nothing. I didn't find a damn thing. All the skirts are where they should be. You can see how, let's see, you can see the orange in here, how crusty this thing was when I got it. It was full of rust. The bores are really bad. And I'll flip it back over. But dingleballed honed it and sent it, and I'm not seeing any issues. And then if I remember right, yeah, I didn't have the ends for the studs. So I used the factory main bolts, and everything is pretty darn happy. The only thing I found that kind of sucks is, let's see, let me get my light, is I pulled the headers off and the intake, and if you can see in here, they're pretty much all just gushing out of the valve stem seals. Some of them are real bad. They're just oil just sitting on top of the valve. Some of the intake sides, like this one, was really bad. That one's fine. That one's fine with a little bit of rust on it. But the intake sides were, Let's see if I can get without tipping the head over. Which, hold on, I'm putting you down. Okay. It's now safe. The intake sides were soaked. This thing, and I noticed that there is epoxy. These were ported when I got them. I didn't know they were ported, but it looks like there's epoxy in pretty much every floor of these. I'm actually really curious what these would flow if I put them on a flow bench, but they're done pretty good. And I think that's why the thing made so much power for as little boost as I was running through it. Once again, for what it was, for a retired bottom end, that was probably seeping like crazy, but you know, rust in the block was super crusty. You got to remember, so a healthy 351 with ported trick flows and an Anderson cam with like 560, 570 lift with like a 245, 238 duration, something like that, probably makes 350-ish, I would guess. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less because of the condition of the engine. But since I was running 14 pounds plus, you can guess it's about double in terms of when you double your atmospheric, which is 14.7, usually you double your NA horsepower. So this thing is probably pretty much every run was about 14 pounds down the strip, launching it around 9 to 12, and then the last outing was 16 to 20, and my map sensor only goes to 21, and it was hitting it repeatedly. And the pistons are perfect. I'll flip this thing over, I'll put it back together, and then I'm gonna do just another real quick, just to go through and show you what the bores were and how bad they were. And you got to remember, sometimes when you don't have the money for stuff, especially when I've got 2 kids, a house, you know, a few cars, a motorcycle and stuff, that you don't have all the money in the world for something. So like some people say, don't get it right, just get it together. And this was supposed to just be a proof of concept. This whole car, just proof of concept with a stock 351. And I proved that it worked. Ran a low 6, it was 612 at 108 and that was the run where it was spiking 21 pounds, and I romped it like 5 times, and then it just broke up at 500 some feet. So it definitely had a 5 in it, if not a 580 plus. So I'm gonna flip this engine over and then we'll look at the bores real quick. I'm not gonna take it all apart because I think this block would probably be a good spare. The crank is probably savable if I ground it, but I remember smacking when I took the rods out, I remember smacking the crank a few times with the studs, kind of like the engine I'm putting in it, but my engine builder caught it and sent it in to be reground. So hopefully they can save that crank from me being stupid and not putting rubber caps before I push it through and it smacked the crank. So use your rubber caps. Don't be like me. And luckily I have a super good engine builder. He's an awesome dude, and everything is precise and has to be a certain way, and I definitely commend that to keep me from doing dumb stuff. So let's get this thing flipped over and let's check everything else out. All right, engine is turned back over. Now, keep in mind, I used the dingle ball hone on this. It was supposed to have been rebuilt. It was not. It sat for a long time. The heads were rebuilt, but they were like the DO heads, which they went in the trash because we were looking to actually make some power. So this is what everything looks like. This is the bore that was probably the worst, I would say. So when people are like, oh, you can't do anything with it because it's got a little bit of stuff on it. Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I didn't have any issues with this at all. Now remember, like, you can kind of feel it with your fingernail a little bit. It was obviously a lot worse. I did red Scotch Brite, and then until it was somewhat smooth, and then I dingle balled it. And the rest of them were kind of okay-ish. And everything looks pretty darn good. And the funny thing is, so this piston is different from all the rest of them because you can see the little dimples in it compared to the valve reliefs compared to these. So this is actually, I think these are if I remember right, it's from oh gosh, it's been too long, but I think these are later truck ones, I think from the 80s, and so they have lesser compression, or sorry, more compression, because the lip, I don't know if you can see it, but the lip on that is not a lot, and then the dish on these is a lot bigger. So I know these are 13cc. I want to say these are like 8 or 9, so this cylinder had a little bit more compression, and probably shows up in the compression tests if I look those up. But everything else was perfect on it. I used Howard's link bar lifters that were used. I used Scorpion 1.6 rockers that were used. I bought very little new parts, like this pan and that pickup and the windage tray and all that, including the pump, all came as a package, and somebody had cleared it, I think, for a 4.150 stroke, which that seemed to work fine. This is a road race pan, so it has little flappy doors in there, they work pretty good. I never saw an issue with oil pressure, besides I think the mains were a little large on this because of my customization of them, and it was perfectly fine. Never had any issues. I was always kind of worried about lower oil pressure because it peaked out at like 46 going down the track and had like 28, 26 hot idle. So I don't know if it was a gauge issue or it actually was making that, because this is my oil pressure feed to my turbo, and that's where I have the sensor mounted, because on these, if you use the factory really super long red and then you put like a sender on the end of it and then you tee it into the turbo feed, those like to snap right at the threads going to the block. And so I have it a little bit different on the Mustang. The Mustang has this going to the remote oil filter or oil pressure sensor that goes to the frame rail, and then it's got a T on this that goes right off. So I don't know if that line affected oil pressure or what, but yeah, pistons are perfect. I haven't taken them out, so we could very well have a broken second ringland, but the catch can never had any oil in it. It just had water from running E85. And even when I pushed it really hard that last day, there's maybe like, I don't know, 2 or 3 drops of oil in the whole catch can. It was just water. So overall, super impressed. Ready to move on to a better setup to make a reliable 700 to 900 horsepower, something like that. I think the car's pretty ready for it. There's not too much else I want to do to it. I mean, you know, the heads are going to have to get gone through now and figure out why they're leaking that much oil. If it's a guide problem, if whoever ported them nicked something they shouldn't have nicked and they didn't fill it like they should have. I hope that doesn't get expensive, because I got those heads for $600, put 2 valves in them, lapped it myself, and just sent it. The surfaces I didn't even have the surfaces cut. They just were already decent. So I don't know if we need to have them resurfaced, but they look pretty darn good. I think they were just done because there was a it's the other head, and I'm not going to flip it over because I'm going to probably drop it. Like, this one's super close to dropping. They had hit a piston and the valve head broke off, and so I cleaned up the bowl and took all the nicks off of it. And you know, if you want to hustle, you can go somewhat fast, and had I not cared about any of the pieces of this engine at all, I could have pushed way more boost. Luckily, the new ECU I have in there goes to 44 psi, so it'll do 30 pounds, somewhere around there, because it's a 4-bar. There's 48. I don't know. Either way, it'll push at least another 10 pounds ish better than what it did before, and then with a T6 S480 pushing 20-30 pounds, it should be able to make what I want it to. So now we wait and wait for the crank to get back, give the balancer and the flex plate to the machine shop, and they'll balance the assembly, and the short block will come back to me, and then we'll see if I can get those heads in a reasonable time. That's my only variable right now, and to even think about getting something that's ported and the pistons are meant for trick flow 170, so I'd have to find a trick flow 170 head, and more than likely I would just run it as cast because I don't have the funds to go have it either be CNC ported by trick flow or, you know, pay $1,300+ for hand porting. So I'm hoping that they pressure check okay and they just need some seals at worst guides. I might blow some air in them and see if I have some super leaky valves, or I don't know. But this thing compression tested at 120 to 130, so even across the board I don't think I have a valve problem. And it was always tough to turn over because it had compression while you were turning it over. But yeah, if you don't have a lot of money, you can make a 351 go pretty quick. I didn't push it near as hard as it could have been pushed, I think. Like I said, a 580 or better, easy in it if you have a decent chassis. And I, you know, spent the money on Team Z suspension pieces, chromoly pieces. The next thing for the car when it gets bigger power is probably going to be a, I think it's Miralat upper and lower box, so we can get some more adjustment out of it. Right now, anti-squat's maxed out, and it seemed to work really good with a mid 130 60 foot, and that was, you know, it was just launching on 14 pounds, ramping up to 16 to 18, and maybe we can this year launch on more and hit mid 20s and hit my goal is a 550 with this new engine, which I think I should be able to do. We'll see if the chassis is up for it, if I need to do some suspension work or start messing with some spring rates in the back or the front. We'll see what it do, but that's it. That's the update of the engine, and hopefully we can get rolling in about a month or two.